Alright, here I am with part 2 of my review. I'm going to talk about the way they named episodes sometimes, and essentially the way that Headmasters tended to spoil itself. Like, for example, in the episodes Return of the Immortal Emperor and the Emperor of Destruction vanishes on an iceberg, during the opening credit sequences they show a picture of Galvatron. So you are already spoiled the fact that they're talking about Galvatron. You know, it totally throws the episode off. And the biggest spoiler of all, one of the episode titles is Ultra Magnus Dies. They say that at the beginning of the episode. Totally ruins any surprise whatsoever. It's totally odd. The cassettes tend to be extremely effective in the Headmaster series, though. I just found myself very impressed with the way that they could spy. You know, like they always spied before, but it just seemed like whenever they needed information, the cassettes were always like right on top of it with either side. Both of the cassettes seemed very impressive, and they started talking for no reason, which was kind of cool. I kind of dug their voices, I don't know why. Although I still think of them all as not talking, except for Rumble, Frenzy, Eject, and Rewind. Speaking of cassettes, there's also the people who own the cassettes, Soundwave and Blaster, who near the beginning of the series kill each other and both get rebuilt. Soundwave gets rebuilt into Sound Blaster, and Blaster gets rebuilt into Twincast. Now that naming system might not make sense, but keep in mind that in Japan they call Blaster Broadcast. So Broadcast, you know, evolves into Twincast, if you will. This is this series has something unique where it's the leader of the Autobots for a long period of it is not a Prime. Optimus Prime dies in the beginning of the series, and then Rodimus Prime leaves to find a new planet for the Transformers to live on, since Cybertron is destroyed, and he leaves Fortress in charge, which is kind of unique, and I actually really dig Fortress as a leader. He makes some interesting decisions, you know, he's a pretty good leader, I have to say. I still like... no, I'm not going to make a judgment call about who I like better. I'm just going to leave that up in the air for right now. But I thought it was interesting that they definitely managed to have a series without any Primes as leaders, and somewhat successful. Speaking of characters, a lot of the characters were either unique to... well, a lot of the characters were new characters, by which I mean like the Headmasters, the Target Masters, the Train Bots, which I'm calling unique characters because even though they had shown up in the US before, in Japan they were all new characters. So essentially, they focused on their own cast and really didn't deal much with the Generation 1 characters. In the episode... what's the name of it? Hold on, I have it written down. I have it written down somewhere. Oh, in the episode Master Sword is in Danger, they actually... Wheelie is captured, and they actually discuss leaving Wheelie to his death instead of giving up the secret of the Master Sword, which is something that I never expected. As soon as Wheelie was captured and they showed him on the view screen, I expected Fortress to say, you know, oh, well, we have to go and save him right now, no question. But the first thing that happened was one of the Target Masters, I forget which one, said, wait a minute, maybe we should just leave him there. And, you know, I kind of think he was kind of right. Wheelie's more than a bit of a dick in Headmasters. He didn't bug me in the regular continuity, but in Headmasters, he's just a jerk. Now, since we're talking about Wheelie, this is the thing that I most wanted to talk about. The thing that I think is the most interesting about Headmasters is Daniel. In Headmasters, the year is 2011. And at the end of the G1 continuity stuff, it was 2005, yet Daniel is still 12. Apparently, there's from what I've read, or from what I've heard, there's a story that they released in the manga, which says that he was in stasis, in cryogenic stasis in that period, which I'll buy. But anyway, Daniel is 12 in Headmasters, and yet he acts very immature, much more immature than he did in the previous show. And at first I found it a bit annoying, but then I started really thinking about it. And maybe I'm overthinking this, but as I said before, all the characterizations are unique for Headmasters, so Daniel being less mature than he was in the American stuff isn't necessarily a continuity issue, if you bear in mind that the characters are different. But it brings up an interesting concept. Daniel acts very immature, and when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because the only people he's had to relate with are his parents and other Transformers. Now, I'm probably definitely reading way more into this than was intended, but I think that because Daniel has had so little interaction with other humans, and especially humans his own age, he's sort of entered into a sort of arrested development state where he's younger because of that. In which case it changes the way you look at his character completely. Like, people who have watched the show, a lot of people don't like Daniel. But when you think about it objectively, you know, considering everything he's been through, like, he's been essentially fighting a war since, you know, he was 5 or 6. Probably. I mean, well, okay, since he was 11. And the only people he's had to interact with are other Transformers. Like, he was the only human going around in space with Fortress. You know, his best friend is a Transformer. Everyone he's interacted with is a Transformer. So I really feel more sympathetic to Daniel, like, especially when he's acting childish. I don't see it as, oh, Daniel's being a whiny brat. I see it as, wow, Daniel really doesn't know how to cope with a lot of stuff that comes up in his life, simply because he doesn't have the peer-to-peer interaction that most people do that would allow them to handle these sort of situations. It's really interesting. I'd say the most interesting thing about Headmasters. I've essentially covered all the points on my list that I wanted to go over, so I'm just gonna talk about the series in general. I really didn't enjoy it that much. There were some interesting things to look at. I'm definitely glad I watched it. I'll say that. I'm definitely glad I watched Headmasters. Because there's a lot of interesting things that happened in it, you know. Megazarek, in general, was very badass and awesome. The stuff about Daniel, you know, Cybertron getting destroyed, and all that, and Fortress leaving the Autobots. There were some interesting things in there. But I think the way it was presented wasn't that great. And as a series, I think it sort of failed. But I think it was also necessary to do in order to set up what comes later. Guess that's really all I have to say. After, you know, next I'm going to watch Master Force and review that. So you can look forward to that. And I guess that's all I have to say. Headmasters, decent show, not that great, had some interesting concepts, did some interesting things. Alright, thanks YouTube, goodbye!